Michael Finke, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dan, and great to see you again. It's been a little bit over a month since we've had a chance to talk.
Yeah, I know. We had a wonderful, slightly chance meeting, I think. Well, I knew you were going to be there, and I knew of you, but you didn't know of me when you made the trip over to London with Texas Tech University and come over and we got to meet. As someone who focuses my professional life in retirement, I've known about you for a while because that's what you do as well, right?
It is, yeah. Retirement has been my area for a little bit over a decade. It's been my main focus. I don't know if you know this, Dan, but I originally started out as a food consumption researcher and eventually made my way into personal finance.
Right. But we need to just stop talking about everything now and go, what was that journey? Tell me about that.
So this relates to some of the research I still do in personal finance, which really fascinates me. But I studied what motivated people to eat healthy foods. And one of the things I found in my research is that there is a certain personality type that is more likely to save money for the future and more likely to choose healthy foods and exercise. And I wanted to know more about why there was such a strong connection between investing and taking care of your health. So I took a PhD class in finance back in 2003. And at the end of that class, which I loved, I just love finance theory at the PhD level because, it is quantitative, but it's also economics. It is applied economics. It is understanding what motivates people to take risk, how much you have to compensate them for accepting variation in the amount of money that they can spend in the future. And I got to the end of that course and the professor took me aside and said, Michael, do you realize how much more money you could make as a finance professor than a food consumption professor? So that's how I ended up in finance, was because I ended up getting my PhD in finance as I was a professor studying food consumption.
Absolutely fascinating. And interestingly, the links are, as you're speaking and as I'm kind of then going back to conversations I've had, the links between that are reasonably obvious, right? Not obvious. It takes, but if you think about the conversations we have about health and well-being, and the origins of the word wealth, which is actually nothing to do with money, and how that's all kind of slipped itself into modern society, it makes sense that people that seem to be better at money are ones that are overall better at looking after wealth and health, right? It's a mindset thing. It's as you said, a personality type, which is hugely interesting because we talk about retirement, and health is a massive part of living a great and happy retirement, right?
What is wealth? Wealth is a store of future spending. It is a store of future happiness. It's just paper. It's dots on a computer screen. It's not anything that actually brings us joy. Why have we accumulated, assuming we didn't inherit the wealth, why did we accumulate it in the first place? Well, we accumulate wealth ostensibly either because we want to spend that in the future to live better, or because we want to pass it on to future generations. But for most of us, what motivates us to accumulate wealth is that we want to use that money to live better in the future. What motivates us to choose the healthier option at lunch? What motivates us to avoid the Cornish pasty, which I actually lived in Cornwall for a few months back when I was 21 years old. I was visiting Europe and I ran out of money and I ended up buying a vacation or renting a vacation place in Cornwall. And all I remember from that experience was sausage Cornish pasties, which are the most delicious dish ever. And how do you avoid eating them every day at lunch if they're nearby? I have no idea.
Absolutely.
But what motivates you to avoid it is that if I eat too many of those, then I'm going to be in poor health in the future. So I defer gratification and I make better choices. I exercise. People enjoy exercise to some extent, but it takes time and effort. You sweat. It's unpleasant. But you do it so that you can live better in the future. All of these are examples of investments. So it makes perfect sense that when people are making a decision about whether to defer gratification today in order to live better in the future, it is the same instinct that is driving health behaviors and money behaviors. And what we see is, at the time, the research was so fascinating to me. I haven't done it in a while. I did a recent survey that we can talk about on retirement and some of the correlations between these behaviors. But it's very clear that there is a personality type that tends to favor future lifestyle. But that also means that you have to sacrifice lifestyles to some extent in the present in order to live better in the future. So it's really a balance. And in economics, we think a lot about this balance between living well today and living well in the future, because that really is what motivates us to save and invest, is that we could spend the money today. We could, go out to dinner or buy a nicer car or a bigger house, but instead we pass it into the future. That's what investing is. And then, the question becomes, Dan, when we get to the future, do we actually feel comfortable spending it? That is something that I've done a lot of research on, which I think is so fascinating. But when you think about what motivates us to defer gratification, we better have a positive idea of how we're going to live in the future. And one of the things that really impressed me about how you initiate a conversation about retirement planning with clients is that you help them imagine what the future can look like in retirement. I don't think I've seen that very often among financial advisors, is taking the care to help people envision what their life in retirement is going to look like. And then you can actually build the financial structure around the lifestyle that they want to live. But it's not like the end result is simply a lump sum of money. The end result is money that can be used for a lifestyle. Now, let's have a conversation about, so that I understand how you want to live when you get to the point of retirement. That can help me design a plan that is actually going to meet your expectations of what your goals are. The goal is lifestyle. That's why you save the money in the first place. Let's design a structure so that you can have the lifestyle that you want to live. I just love that idea.
I massively appreciate it. I think for me, what any type of design work that you do, constructing a financial plan is design. It's creative. It's artistic. It's there's a whole number of different. It's not just a financial equation. And to me, anything that you start designing, and this is what I'd give tips to anyone that's kind of listening here. If you were building a house, you want an idea what the house wants to look like, right? You're not just going to go and start to build the house and then see what happens as you're building it. You need an idea about the thing you want to live in, and actually, do you want to build a 2-bedroom house knowing that you're going to have kids in 5 years' time, so you might want to build a 4-bedroom house? Like the future, you need some sort of idea of the future. And I think the observations that I've made when I'm working with people and all the research that I do is that people don't spend nowhere near enough time putting a vision in place, imagining what they're retiring to. They spend too much time or too much focus on what they're retiring from, and so therefore it's very hard to design any type of plan or financial plan or lifestyle plan, because we don't simply know what the money's for. And that brings me on to I want to quote you directly, and I think it will set up this next part of the conversation beautifully. I just want to say something. We talk about food. One of my memories from when we met is seeing 12 Americans try Scotch eggs for the first time. It was brilliant. Like you had no idea what they were. They were like eggs covered in this thing. Some people loved them, some people hated them. Talking about sausage rolls. I mean, if you eat Scotch eggs, you're not going to be healthy forever, right? So that was I just want to get that was really funny.
You can guess whether I was a hater or a lover.
Yeah,
based on my British pasties.
Yeah. No, you had 3 of them. You didn't. So you mentioned it, Michael. A lot of your research, a lot of the work that I do is around spending, and you said something that profoundly struck with me, and I've put it in some things I've done and quoted you on some newsletters I've put out. But you said if you get to retirement and you don't feel you can actually spend the money that you've saved, then you haven't really succeeded. That's something I absolutely subscribe to. So let's unpack that in terms of how do we start to think about retirement to make sure that we can move from what is probably a saving habit, right? Because we've saved forever, and we've maybe, if we have delayed gratification and we've done all that, to suddenly shift ourselves and go, well, actually, I want retirement to be a success. I want to be able to feel like I enjoy the second half of my life, the third act, the financial independence, however we want to reframe this. What do we have to start to think about, and how do we have to start to maybe rewire ourselves and think about retirement in order to have that success?
A couple of years ago, I developed a very simple step-by-step process to create a retirement income plan. And when I was thinking about what the first step should be, I thought it was very important that people recognize there's only two places your money can go when you retire. You can either spend it or you can pass it on to others. Most people never give much thought to how much of their nest egg they want to spend and how much of it they really want to pass on to others. In economics, we have this term called unintended bequests. And it's meant to describe a phenomenon that economists have noticed for decades, which is people don't really say they want to give a huge amount of money to others when they die, but they do. They don't spend nearly as much as you would think that they would spend according to any economic model that was calibrated around people's preferences for lifestyle and bequests. So what ends up happening is that people get to retirement, they have a lump sum of money, £1 million, £1 million, £2 million, 500,000 pounds. And they want to embrace it, and they don't want to see it get smaller. There is a psychological barrier. And I think that there is a very good evolutionary explanation for why we don't want to see our store of grain get smaller in the winter. We want to put our arms around it and say, it's your job to make sure I always have that amount of money. And I'll just skim a bit from my gains in order to supplement my lifestyle. And then what ends up happening is that you die, and oftentimes you don't spend enough early on in retirement. Maybe later on in retirement, the money keeps growing and it ends up getting passed on to your kids, and they're the ones who enjoy if you have kids. But recognize that you had a choice, and your choice was, do I want to spend the money that I've saved, that I've sacrificed to be able to build, or am I going to be happier passing it on to someone else? I mean, if it's fine if you want to pass it on to someone else, but give yourself the agency to be able to choose whether or not a portion of your savings should be used to help you live better. And if that's the case, then let's design a way to make sure that you can spend as much as possible every year. That's rational. But people are not rational. I mean, there is this natural human tendency not to want to admit that we're mortal. That, I think, affects a lot of our decisions in 100%. Retirement. We expect that we're going to live forever. There is, in fact, this very awesome artwork created by a Brit, and the title of the artwork is "It's a Dead Shark in Formaldehyde." So it's the title of the artwork is "The Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living." And I just love that title. The whole purpose of the artwork is to walk around this shark, which was big enough to eat you, and imagine your own mortality, because normally that's not something you would ever do. Recognizing our own mortality is an important step. I actually have a friend who's a financial advisor who eases clients into this by asking them, all right, what do you want your money to be doing for you 50 years in the future? So what he does is he begins with a legacy goal, and then let's carve out a portion. Let's help you live forever. It's called symbolic immortality. So let's help you live forever with the legacy portion of your nest egg. And now that we've taken care of your ability to live forever, let's think about how you're going to spend down the rest. It makes it easier psychologically. But I think we're all capable of recognizing that we're mortal and building our own plan around our inevitable mortality, and creating a plan that actually gives us the ability psychologically to spend the money that we've saved for the purpose of having a better lifestyle.
One of my observations about this is that and I've written about this and I say it a lot about, and I've kind of nicked the phrase and put my own little spin on it, but I do think the vast majority of people would rather give their money away with a warm heart, not a cold hand. So we believe that gifting should be at end of life, right? Let's leave it till the end of life. But we know through, brain science, we know how giving our money away makes us feel. We know how seeing people use that for good and, makes us feel. I do believe that we're playing righteous tricks on ourselves a little bit, retirees.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of like, I want to leave a legacy. I do believe what they're honestly saying is I'm a little bit scared about running out of money. So, if one of the big things for me is that if we can demonstrate that, and look, some people genuinely do have some legacy wishes, right? They genuinely have the thing they want to leave behind. But in general, I believe most people would rather bring forward their ability to give money to their friends, their family, and children, nieces, nephews, children, charities, all that stuff, whilst they're living. But they have, and we're going to get onto this, they have not enough comfort to do that because of the longevity thing that I'm sure we're going to talk about. It's, how long am I going to live, and will I need care, and will my costs go up significantly? There's so many unknowns to this that then just causes people to not do anything, right? It's easier to not do anything and leave it because I've got little, there's less risk in that potentially than actually bringing this forward and spending it hard. I do think that, and as you said, you've used I think how we talked about this before we hit record, but the shift on how we view retirement, how we value retirement, how we use our imagination to what this looks like is a big part of this, because I do think if we hang in the spreadsheets and we hang in the numbers, it could cause wrong behaviors, right? It could make us, become too aware of 4% this, 5% this, 3% that, and what can I spend, and markets this and market that, instead of actually kind of understanding, what life is all about and how life progresses rather than how spreadsheets move.
I had a friend who I knew from a shared hobby, and he recently passed away at the age of 71, and we've had lunch together for maybe the last 6 or 7 years. And I think about all of the decisions, the financial decisions he made over the time that I've known him. And none of those financial decisions were about how can I use the money that I've saved to generate the most amount of happiness now. It was very much about winning. It was about where can I get the highest rate of return, and how can I take the money that has matured and invest it into something else. He did get a certain amount of satisfaction from that. And then the question needs to happen. What ended up happening, of course, is that he's dead, and all of the joy that he could have gotten from that money is gone. And was he living, I do think we spend our whole lives with this mindset that we have this habit of thrift, and we feel good about ourselves when we accumulate more wealth. We want to win. It's a competition. It's a goal. We like setting goals. We like, opening up our account balance and seeing a big number. But none of that really provides the same amount of happiness as taking your family on a trip to Europe, or renting a place in a vacation destination you've always wanted to go to with your spouse. That's how you really generate. And especially I think in that time period after retirement through your 70s, if you think about how much joy you get from each dollar, it's never higher than right now when you're in retirement. I feel like a lot of people make errors when it comes to spreading that money across their lifespan because they're so focused on the worst case scenario. They have built up all of these habits that reward them internally for not spending the money or generating the highest amount of return that they can get on it. And not enough time thinking about what is the money there for? What is the purpose of the money? What's going to happen to the money after I'm gone? That's, I think, a much healthier way to think about money is that it's an input. It is an input into activities that could potentially provide me with joy. Now, people do a lot of bad things with money in the sense that they don't know how to generate joy from the money that they spend. But there are a lot of things that you can do with money that clearly do provide joy. A lot of interesting research on social spending, things that provide opportunities for greater social interaction. Those are the kind of things that tend to provide us with the greatest amount of happiness. If we're aware of that, then we can wring the most amount of satisfaction from each one of those dollars that we sacrificed to save for retirement. That's winning the game. Losing the game is like, what's the purpose of sacrificing during your working years if you don't benefit from it later on in life? And I had a friend who is a fellow professor. He does something completely different. He is in graphic design. And when you're a professor, you have this option once you've been at an institution for a certain amount of time. And that is you can take a sabbatical of one semester and get paid your full salary. Or you can take a sabbatical of 2 semesters, which is a full school year, and you get paid half your salary. So I was eligible for a sabbatical. I wrote up a research project I was going to do, and I took my 1 semester off at full salary, of course, because that's the optimal way to do it. And when I told my friend that, he said, "That's stupid. Why did you do that?" He said, "If you take both semesters off and you've got your summers on each bookend, you've got 15 months of retirement when you're in your early 40s. So basically what you've done is you've taken 15 months of retirement from your 60s or 70s and you front loaded it into your 40s." And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, that's the problem with having the mind of an economist versus someone who is actually more rational about getting the most happiness out of life. What he did was he took the 15 months sabbatical and he enjoyed it. Like this was retirement. He was experiencing retirement at an age where he could get more enjoyment out of it. And I love that example because, first of all, it shows you and I would probably take the 1 semester. That would be our immediate instinct. Most people who are money-minded are constantly thinking, I don't want to make a choice that's going to reduce my wealth. But he was making the choice that was going to maximize the amount of happiness he was getting over the course of his lifetime, and he was right. And I made a decision that at the surface seemed rational, but in retrospect was not the rational choice. And it really has got me thinking a lot more about what it means to have money and what it means to make sacrifices to have more of it.
It's so interesting. I think it comes to a point, doesn't it, where you go, how do we create happiness in our retirement? And one of the best ways we create happiness is by decreasing our net wealth. There's a relationship between the two. And then, but we know it's, as you said, it's so difficult for people to be able to feel like they can do that, because one of the challenges, I think, and a couple of my most popular sketches that I do are around kind of time. So I've got this health span versus lifespan sketch, and as you said, people just don't, 1 year, in my view, is that 1 year post 60 is different to 1 year post 50 is different to 1 year post 40. And there is this window, I've written about it, this window of spending opportunity between the ages of when you decide to kind of think about retirement to probably your early 70s. And then you go into a more kind of sedater, slowering phase. And then in your early 80s, you'll go into kind of more of a later life phase. And if we don't recognize that, and what I love about your friend is that he's, as you said, he's basically brought forward a retirement period to a time when he can fully enjoy it. Your money is worth more to you in your 60s in retirement than it's going to be worth to you more in your 70s, because your ability to experience the joy that money can bring is going to diminish. And so front loading the fun, doing things, spending money up front is going to be hugely beneficial to people actually, as you said, wringing out the happiness and joy from their money. And what I try and bring to the table is a sense of reality, right? I'm not going to, if we, and you've done a load of research in this, and I think this modern day retirement now has got research backing this up, right? We've got 30, 40, 50 years of data that's kind of going, well, actually, we know that real-time spending falls in retirement. We know that health does this in retirement. We know that, so there's data now that we can kind of bring some more evidence to retirement planning rather than just some kind of hearsay, which I think so crucial to this. Feeling like we can front load the fun, spend the money hard up front, whilst health and time is on our side, should be a fundamental part of everybody's retirement plan. And you need imagination and creativity to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to spend your time. And I'd love to get your take on something before we come back to some spending, because you mentioned before we hit record around mindset and positivity. I think how we view retirement and how positive we are about our years going forward is going to be able to shape the way that we want to spend our money.
I did a survey recently in collaboration with a guy named David Stewart from aegis.com. And he has this idea that so many of these behaviors are correlated, that health and financial behaviors are correlated among people who are retirement age. That personality type that we talked about before that tends to care a lot about health also cares a lot about money. One of the points that he introduced that I had not been aware of is that positivity is a lot of what drives this. So I mentioned before, there are people who are more forward thinking. In the way that economists traditionally think about it, being more forward thinking means that we discount our happiness at age 70 or 80 at a lower rate. So in other words, we place more value on our happiness when we're in our 60s or 70s or 80s. That's what motivates us to make investments. But if we have a positive attitude about what life is going to be like in our 70s, that's going to drive that motivation. So it's not just that we're unable to defer gratification. It is that we have a positive idea of what it's going to be like to be in our 70s. And David on his website caters to a type of retiree who is very positive about the idea of being in their 70s, about being financially independent, about having all the time in the world to go on vacations. And that crowd has made the investment in their health to actually be able to enjoy that decade and into their 80s. These are people. I did a book review last year. It was a health book by Peter Attia called Outlive. And
Brilliant
one
book.
of the points that Peter made is that, first of all, health is an investment. And second of all, that you can measure your wealth using indicators like VO2 max. What is VO2 max? VO2 max is our ability to process oxygen efficiently. So when we walk up a flight of stairs, are we going to be winded by the time we get halfway through that flight of stairs? That's VO2 max. But in order to have a high VO2 max, you have to exercise. You have to have vigorous exercise to be able to maintain your ability to efficiently process oxygen. If you look at the statistics on VO2 max, you see that among everybody, it doesn't matter what your health is, among everybody, it declines as you get older. So your ability to process oxygen gets worse when you're in your 60s and 70s, and it declines every single year. Now, there's all sorts of other indicators that decline at about 1% per year once you get into your 60s and 70s. So you change physically. It's one of the reasons that I think it makes sense to not just retire, but to have different expectations about what you can do in the workforce once you hit an advanced age, because we do change as we get older. But one of his points is that, like investing, you can't start making that investment in your late 50s and expect to be in good shape when you're in your 60s and 70s. You have to start in your 40s and early 50s and make that investment regularly, because if your goal is to go hiking in Switzerland and you've saved money so that you can fly and rent a chalet, but you haven't made the investment in your VO2 max, you're not going to be able to hike in Switzerland. So it is a combination of money and investment in health together. And what motivates you is that you have this positive belief about how well you could live in your 70s. And that does seem to drive savings behavior more than I would have expected. It also drives the value of being able to spend money in your 80s and 90s. That people who think that life is going to be more pleasurable in their 80s are more motivated to ensure that they still have income in their 80s.
It's really interesting when we start to frame this. To me, it's really starting to come down to the ability for us, and I had a ability for us to kind of create this vision, right? The future self, the imagination, and be positive about what that's going to look like. I interviewed Hal Hirschfield on the podcast, so Hal's wrote a great book called Your Future Self, right? And humans are pretty rubbish at kind of that kind of visioning that. But if we can get ourselves out there and we can start to think about what this, and that's kind of part of the work that I do that you very kindly mentioned earlier on. It's constantly trying to build the vision for the future. What does it look like? What are you going to do? How will you feel? What does it mean? Who are you going to spend it with? Quite like your financial planner friend, if we can start outwards a little bit, start in your 70s, what does that look like, and work backwards and think about. I think these are really amazing tips for people just to start to kind of reframe themselves and start to think about. There's a couple of points that I really want to get to before we get. I think we might need like 2 more conversations, Michael, for us to kind of get through all of this. People say to me when I start working with them, and I talk about in retirement how people struggle to spend money. That's a central ethos for me. They struggle to spend enough or as much as they should. And I get the comment, "Oh, no, don't worry about us. We can spend like anything. We won't struggle to spend." And then I go back to them and I go, no, you're saying you're spending income, right? You don't mind spending. You've got a salary and bonus coming in. That's what you're spending. What people struggle to spend is capital or assets. So I really want to get your take on this. I know you've written about this a lot. Spending from income versus spending from assets. We need to understand that psychologically, there's a completely different kind of thing on both of those, right?
Yeah, Dan, let's talk first of all about the 2 types of wealth. One is you have a pot of money. So you have a certain number, and that number can get larger or smaller over time depending on how you invest and how lucky you get. And there's another form of wealth, which is what we call annuitized wealth. So if you have some sort of old age pension, then you're eligible to receive a certain amount of money every month, but we can actually place a value on that. And the value on that is, what is the present value of every check that you expect to get as long as you're alive? And so we can actually say that there's an equivalent. You have $500,000 of wealth, or you have $35,000 of income. They represent the same amount of wealth. In fact, you can go in the marketplace and you can buy an annuity that will give you a promised $35,000 a year, pounds, from your $500,000. And what we want to know is, will you spend more when you have wealth in the form of income versus wealth in the form of investments? Now, we had a hunch that you would spend more from income. Why? Because you don't have to worry about possibly running out. And when you have an income that is guaranteed to last for a lifetime, you don't have to be conservative with your savings, so that if you have a lump sum of money, let's say your average longevity is age 88, then you don't want the money to run out at the age of 88, because then you've got a 50% chance of having to live on your very basic income. So what you'll do is you'll spread the money maybe out to the age 95. But then still, you might have a 20% chance of outliving your savings. That's too much. So maybe you spread it out to the age of 100. And if you do that, which any reasonable risk-averse person would do, you're going to spend less every year. So we would have expected, according to economic theory, that people will spend more from income than they will from assets. So we found that people spend more from income than assets, but they spent so much more that there has to be some kind of a behavioral explanation in addition to this rational economic explanation. And it was about double. So that's crazy. That's, in other words, people in an era where they got a pension from their employer, even though they didn't have $1 million or £1 million, they spent more. They lived better every year. Then the question becomes, well, should you buy income when you get to retirement? Should you take a chunk of your savings and buy yourself an income that you have no psychological problem spending? And we see this all the time. I have this data set that I use called the Health and Retirement Study, which tracks retirees starting in 1994 all the way to present day. And there are people in this data set. There is one particular woman who has $1.5 million in investable assets. And then she has a income from Social Security, which pays her about $25,000 a year. And that's what she spends. She spends $25,000 a year. And the rest of it, she, for whatever reason, feels like she can't spend. And my guess is that she doesn't want every dollar of that necessarily to get passed on to her beneficiaries. I think she's just afraid to spend it. And I think that's just a natural human tendency, that we feel bad if our savings get smaller, but we feel okay spending every dollar of a paycheck.
This absolutely fascinates me. You have coined this, and I love it. This is kind of the license to spend. So this is the research that you've done with David Blanchett, who was on the podcast. And I really want to touch on this, because I think the way that we frame this stuff is so important to adding into our positivity and mindset and how we do this. Because people hear the word annuity, and I think it comes with negative, particularly in the UK, there's a negativity around an annuity. Annuity rates haven't been particularly good. They've just, from a spreadsheet or mathematical point of view, they've just discounted them, right? They've gone, oh, actually, it's going to take me ages to get my money back. And, for the amount I'm giving up, I'm not getting a great income. And so they have that kind of, and also this kind of, well, it only goes to my spouse and then it doesn't go anywhere else thereafter, and all of that. And also, I think people see it as a very defensive type strategy. But from what you're saying, it's actually the opposite, right? An annuity acts as a license to spend, because people that have this license to spend on average about double what other people are doing. And if you get the mix of guaranteed income, and we have state pension over here, you guys have Social Security over in the States, so there is some sort of government-led income that we would hopefully all get at some point. If we can kind of top that up with some other guaranteed income, all we're then doing, as you've said, we're transferring that longevity risk to an institution, right? We can get rid of it. We can get rid of the risk of running out of money in old age, and therefore you spend every dollar or pound of that income, because it's a use it or lose it type income that you're getting, and then the savings can be freed up to live, give, spend, experience, and all of that stuff. So your take on this kind of defensive versus annuities are rubbish and all this stuff, because because a modern retirement is just full of retirement pots, right? The defined benefit final salary pensions have gone away, but it looks like our grandfathers and our great grandfathers might have had a much better retirement because they just had this lovely guaranteed income. We're here stressing about whether we're going to run out or not.
Yeah, let's begin, Dan, with a discussion of how annuities are created, because I think that can help clarify some of the resistance that people have to buying one. An annuity is designed by an insurance company using bond investments. So when you think about your portfolio, you have stocks that are riskier, you have bonds that are less risky. And the question becomes, okay, of that chunk, which is less risky, is it better to spread it out to the age of 100? Or is it better to hand it over to an insurance company, have the insurance company invest the money, and then they have a good idea of, on average, how long you're going to live? Many people underestimate their longevity. We've made amazing advances in advanced economies over the last 100 years in longevity, particularly people who have enough money to worry about it. So, people who earn more money live longer. An average man who at the age of 65 can expect to live, if they're in a high income tax bracket, they can expect to live to maybe age 88. A woman can expect to live to age 89 or 90 on average. The price of the annuity is the cost of providing that income to the expected longevity, plus a little bit for the profit of the insurance company. So maybe the age of 91. But what that allows you to do is spend as if you were going to live to age 91 without having to worry about the possibility that you could live to the age of 100. So you can spend more from that chunk of money that you otherwise would have invested in bonds. You can spend more every year. Now, the upside of that is that you can actually spend less every year from the remainder of your investment portfolio to fund the same income goal. And if you have a goal of, say, spending an additional $60,000 a year on top of your social insurance, then taking a chunk of your bond savings, using it to buy an income that allows you to spend more every year, then you can actually take less out of the remainder of your investments to fund that same 60,000 goal, or you can increase your goal to 65,000 and spend more from the remainder of your portfolio. Because the worst case scenario is that you're going to have to live on your annuity income plus your social insurance. So it really, mathematically, it gives you the ability to spend more. But I think even more psychologically, you will spend every dollar from the check that you get from the insurance company and never feel bad about it. Whereas if you had to pull the money out of your investments, it's likely that you would feel more reticent about spending it. And again, you're trying to get the most happiness that you can from the money that you've saved. This is a way to generate more happiness. It's, I was having a great conversation. I can't remember with who, but it was another retirement economist. Oh, it was Steve Parrish at the American College. So we were having a conversation about retirement strategies, and he was telling me that he had taken a portion of his savings and bought an annuity because he wanted to trick himself into spending it. And I thought, well, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to do when I get to retirement. I want to be able to trick myself into spending my retirement savings in a more rational way.
Just take that on board, everyone listening. I do believe we are going to have to pull some tricks on ourselves, right? Because humans, and I talk about this, human beings aren't wired for this modern day retirement. We're being told that we're living longer, and by the way, you've got this pot of money that you've now got to manage effectively yourself. Even if people are working with financial planners like us, the burden still is on their shoulders effectively to kind of worry about this stuff. So a modern retirement is full of full of more anxiety, unknowns than it's ever been. No wonder people struggle. No wonder people go back to work. No wonder people want, because it's that the ability to be happier, the ability to maybe buy happiness through this stuff, the ability for us to take away some of those anxieties and be able to feel like we are we're going to be able to trick ourselves into spending the money we've worked so hard to accumulate, I think is an amazing way to really think about this. And annuities are an amazing way, and forgetting you guaranteed lifetime income, right? That's what we want to reframe retirement and reframe these words. Now I think are more powerful than what we believe. Retirement has negative connotations, annuities have negative connotations, pensions even have negative connotations. Pensions are associated with scams and financial advisors running off with your money and all. People just get so negative. Like we talk about the positive mindsets. I think it's a great way to start to think about aligning our money with our most important values and goals, and it will allow us to be happier spending it.
I agree. I mean, that's the whole goal. It's to, I mean, that's to me, that's what financial planning is all about. Like, financial planning is not about wealth maximization. It's about happiness maximization. So how can we create a strategy that's going to generate the most amount of happiness?
Yeah. And I think the more that we can talk about that to clients, right? And that's why I try and stay away from numbers as much as possible in the initial bit, because we get into the numbers bring certain behaviors and anxieties, and it ends up overtaking and clouding a lot of these decisions. It's kind of like, tell me what you want to do in retirement, and you've got chicken and egg, right? Tell me what I'm doing in retirement. Oh, I don't know yet until you tell me how much I can spend. Well, hold on. Like, where do we go with this? It's kind of, if I tell you that you can only spend $20,000, £25,000, whatever, then you're only gonna go to that, right? Tell me what you want. Tell me what you want to do, and let's figure out the most robust way that we can help you achieve those things whilst time is on your side, because this is the things that you've told me brings you happiness. And one final point I want to make to the listeners out there, I've said this a couple of times, and just get your views on this, Michael, before we wrap up. We've talked, what I don't want people to think is that all we've talked about memories and experiences and spending money and all of this stuff is about those big ticket items. This isn't about, turning left on the plane and only flying business class or first class. This isn't about holidays that cost £20,000, £30,000 or dollars. This isn't about giving away hundreds of thousands of pounds to your children. In my experience, the freedom to think in a simple manner and find out what makes you happy is often the simpler things. So the freedom to spend your money on what makes you happy isn't going to always be these ideas of grandeur, but people still, even if it's not those, people still are hesitant to spend. And we know from the research that we do that, what's important to people is often a lot more simpler and doesn't cost as much as what people think when they start to plan these, create these financial plans.
And we need to have a whole session where we talk about the research on spending money to get the most amount of happiness from life. But I couldn't agree with you more that when people have an idea of, I can spend more money in order to live better, I can spend it on these types of luxuries or this kind of thing. But in reality, you can actually generate a lot more happiness from being judicious about how you spend your money on the things that actually produce the greatest amount of happiness.
That's a wonderful place to leave it, because what I'm going to do is get you back on the podcast to talk about spending money to get the most out of happiness, to get the most happiness out of life. That's what we're going to do. But I couldn't agree more with that statement. Michael, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. I know the listeners are going to take so much value from this. What's the best way that they can kind of tap into some of your thoughts and messages, etc.?
Sure. If they, I am a contributing editor to a publication called Think Advisor. So If you want to search my name and Think Advisor, or Advisor Perspectives, that's another publication that I write for, you can get a overview of my ideas on planning for not just retirement, but also investments.
I'll put all those links on the show notes. And really, I encourage anyone listening to check this out. As I said before, what's really, really fascinating to me and makes me really excited about the future is the work that you're doing, Michael, and your colleagues and your friends that I know well as well. Because we are taking this data that we now know. We're getting enough information to present to the people out there about what this looks like, what brings happiness, how spending evolves, how life span and health span evolves. And the more that we can get this out there and bring a sense of reality to people's planning and expectations, I think the better that everyone's going to retire in the future.
I agree. It's changed my life. It's changed the way that I think about my own retirement.
We should cover that on the next episode as well. How's Michael going to retire? Michael, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you dialing in from the other side of the pond. And can't wait to catch up with you again very, very soon.
I enjoyed it very much, Dan. I look forward to it.
And that just leaves me to thank everyone once again for joining us on the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.